community resource, one that promotes, connects, and fosters a sense of well-being. Gael and Bob maintain a focus on sharing books, publishing, marketing, and writing solutions. They serve listeners by providing outlets for their creative skills and energies, and they help them flourish in the competitive marketplace. Their weekly show provides intros, writing spotlights, helps you in promoting your book, your writing, your publishing, your marketing tidbits, and much more. Okay, audience, here's Gael and Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hello, Gael.
How are you today?
I'm good.
Yeah? Staying out of trouble? Not if you have to hesitate.
I'm not staying out of trouble.
Obviously, you're not staying out. How has your week been, my dear?
It's been good.
Yeah?
It's been good.
Anything interesting happen?
Well, the money keeps coming in. I'm happy.
Oh, well, that's always good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. My week was okay, I think. I'm trying to remember now. It's been such a long week.
I did manage to get the announcement out for the Writers Guild meeting.
Oh, wonderful. And when is that going to be?
That's going to be on AI, the topic.
Okay.
And Rachel Ashworth is going to speak.
Does she use AI?
She's actually a manager for the Seventh-day Adventist Church worldwide.
Wow.
They manage and publish posts and are doing it all through AI.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That is very interesting.
I haven't shown you. I've got a whole collection of prompts for writing.
You haven't shown those to me.
Oh, and by the way, what I'll do, I'm going to add these to the website for authors-edge.com.
Okay.
And so you can download those. Maybe it'll be next week.
Okay.
And I'll have that done.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And then we do have a book coming out, don't we?
Yes, we do.
All right. What's the name of that book?
It's writing.
I thought it said Ink. Ink to Success.
Ink to Success.
How come I know it and you don't?
Well, because you changed it.
Oh, okay. Since you put it that way. All right.
All right.
Okay, so Bob, we have someone with us today. It's just like me talking.
Stevens. And Richard, let me just go over a little bit. Learning from a young age about the importance of fair play, honor, and integrity, a U.S. Navy veteran. I dated a U.S. Navy veteran, by the way. Former mayor and retired county sheriff Richard Stevens filled multiple roles throughout his 30-plus years in law enforcement and public service. From standing on the same ground where lives were taken, leading teams into dangerous situations, and ensuring those who were entrusted to him with their safety lived to see another day. Little did he know the impact his chosen calling would ultimately have upon him, both physically and emotionally. Plagued with unresolved trauma, Richard carried on as a peace officer would, hiding the remnants of the lifetime of darkness deep within the confines of his mind to maintain his personal dignity as a leader and protector. Overtaken by the darkness of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress, Richard was subjected to the life-altering concept of crisis intervention teams. Learning the benefits of behavioral health and wellness, Richard began the journey of bringing law enforcement wellness to the forefront of our minds. That's a tough battle.
It certainly is.
I remember my dad he was on Iwo Jima.
Well, I remember my dad coming home from a shooting.
Yeah.
That was not fun.
That's right. He was a police officer.
Yeah, he was a police officer for 27 years.
Yeah. Richard began the journey of bringing law enforcement wellness to the forefront of our minds through providing a glimpse into the minds of the modern-day police servant. The must-read account provides a detailed action plan for understanding what officers feel, think, and consider when carrying out their duty, with the goal of building relationships and fostering cooperation between law enforcement and behavioral health partners. This gripping account that Richard wrote of one man's journey of personal growth is a staple for every professional hoping to affect change, really. Follow along as Richard describes countless life events, horrifying encounters, and lifelines he's discovered throughout the years of service. This realistic real-life story is about overcoming obstacles while enhancing our understanding about why cops think what they think and act in a manner they do. It's a journey into awareness and relationship building centered around commitment, understanding, and wellness. Wow.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit of the pivotal moment or a series of events that led you to encounter crisis intervention teams and embark on your journey towards advocating for law enforcement wellness?
Sure. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're more than welcome. We were looking forward. We are honored, and we thank you for your service.
Thank you. Yeah, and probably the pivotal time to try to figure out what was the time that kind of moved me towards crisis intervention is really kind of a difficult one, because in law enforcement, you've got a lot of men and women who truly feel that they've got to keep this strength up. They've got to keep this persona up of being the strong person, the person that their public, that their brothers and sisters can turn to.
The tough guy.
Yeah.
Have to maintain the tough guy.
Absolutely, because if they were to let their walls down, they will show vulnerability and show that possibly people may feel like they can't rely on them to help them. So my journey with actual crisis intervention teams actually started about, probably around 7-8 years ago, where I was the sheriff of Carter County down in South Central Missouri. And I'd been in law enforcement for 20 plus years at that time, and felt like I had a pretty good grasp of everything that was necessary. I did like the normal cop. I'd deal with things. I would deal with trauma. I would deal with stressors and just kind of throw it in the back burner. And then I had a guy who was my community behavioral health liaison that would come by the jail every so often, and he would say, "Hey, if you need anything at all, if you guys have any of your inmates in the jail that need anything, just give us a call." And so it kind of opened the door to where then we transitioned into what they call the crisis intervention teams, which were a part of the Missouri model of CIT.
What is that exactly?
What
The crisis intervention.
Yeah, well, crisis intervention team
What makes up
does.
the crisis intervention
Yeah.
team? Okay.
What it is
Who
it
makes
actually
it up?
stemmed from the Memphis model of crisis intervention, and what it was several years ago. There was a mother that had called the Memphis police because her son, who was developmentally disabled, had a knife, and she was worried he was going to hurt himself. And the officers went on scene and tried to de-escalate the situation, and the situation ended up bad. Well, what happened was the officers were doing everything that they were trained, that they knew how to do, and doing it right. But the administrators and the mayor at the time had put together a task force to see if we could do it better. And a lot of times you see that in law enforcement. We do try to self-correct and try to do things better. So they determined that really we need to really emphasize training our law enforcement officials, our officers, the men and women on the ground, in in areas dealing with mental illness, mental health, how to recognize when somebody may be experiencing a mental health crisis.
Mhm.
And then also equip them with the tools to be able to effectively de-escalate that situation. Because when you look at police use of force, a lot of times things are totally acceptable under the law, but there's a better way to do it. And if we can train our officers the better way of how to deal with somebody that maybe is upon experiencing psychosis or experiencing a crisis because they're upon the autism spectrum,
Right.
then we're better off in the long run.
Absolutely.
So I became trained in that and really saw the benefit as a law enforcement administrator of ensuring that the men and women that worked for me were trained in that, because ultimately our goal in law enforcement is to serve our public. And how better to serve them than to equip our men and women behind the badge with the tools to understand that it's not, it's not simply black and white for say where, to deal with this, you can only do this. There's a lot of grayness in there where we can effectively deal with somebody and help them using a lot less force than we may have been necessary before.
What's kind of interesting to me is that a lot of people in the service of the community, police in particular, are veterans.
Yes.
And I would imagine a lot of veterans can come home with a lot of issues
Sure.
and baggage.
Yeah.
I mean, I just remember my dad, before he passed, he never talked about his experiences. Never. But only at the very end he did.
Yeah. Well, and you really think about it, that, some of the most recent studies talked about that about 90% of people deal with trauma in their life, or they've experienced trauma. And they talk about how law enforcement in general is twice as likely to experience trauma as the normal person. To where actually they say that a normal street officer, a man or woman that's out there working the road, will experience around 3 traumatic events every 6 months of their career.
Wow.
Which then leads it into the fact that about 18% of law enforcement, 10 to 30% of our fire personnel and first responders, and about 16% of our veterans deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of it, like you were saying, a lot of times they just don't talk about it. They just keep
my
it in the
dad
back.
didn't either. When my dad came home from the incident, actually, what my dad did is he sat down at the kitchen table. He asked my mother to bring him a bottle of it's a French alcohol. It's it was a cognac, which my father wouldn't normally drink in the middle of the afternoon, and he put away several shots of that, and then they went on vacation.
Yeah.
And then he was called back the next day to come and read a report or to report about what had happened, and that was it.
Sure.
Don't let me forget, tell us the name of your book.
Yeah.
And tell us where we can find it.
Sure. The name of our book is The Calling, and it's subtitled Seating at the Table with the Broken. And I'll explain here a little bit how that all came to be as far as the title. But right now it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can get an ebook, Apple ebook, and so forth.
Great.
So who exactly is on your team for your crisis intervention?
We have a huge collaborative effort. And what you'll see is with the crisis intervention teams right now in the state of Missouri, we've got, I think it's 98 councils. I could be incorrect there. I'm going to get in trouble here when I go back.
No.
But what you have is you've got normally councils throughout where almost every county, there's only a couple counties that we're still working towards getting that isn't a part of a council. So like where I'm at, I'm a part of the Three Rivers Crisis Intervention Team Council. And our area that we cover is Carter, Ripley, Reynolds, Wayne, Butler, Pimscott, and Dunklin counties.
Okay.
And then out of that,
In Missouri.
yes, in Missouri.
Right.
And then out of that, what we try to do is we try to get as much of the law enforcement buy-in. So we'll have like people from the sheriff's departments, the sheriff's offices, the police departments. And then we have just a wide array, whether it's the Department of Mental Health through the state, Children's Division, the Veterans Administration, the local hospitals, ministerial alliances. It's a huge collaboration of community members, community stakeholders that we get together, like our council, we get together once a month. And our main goal is to set up training for law enforcement. And we put on one annual basic crisis intervention team training, which is free to officers. It's 40 hours training, teaching them how to, again, recognize when someone may be going through a mental health crisis or behavioral health crisis, and then equipping them with tools to de-escalate it. And then we do an advanced telecommunicator training. But then what we do also is monthly, as we're preparing for this large training, we get together and we brainstorm about how to make our community stronger, how we can, as a whole, as a collaborative group, be able to help law enforcement and first responders meet their mission of serving their public, while also making sure that any gaps are bridged for services for people. So it's very common that we would maybe be in a crisis intervention team meeting and we may talk about specific cases. Well, I struggled. One of the big things when I was first getting in crisis intervention teams was really difficult for smaller counties, for smaller jurisdictions, because we would take somebody that may be a danger to themselves, and we may have on a 96-hour commitment order, and we'd take them to the hospital, and we'd have to sit there for 4 or 5 hours while they evaluated them. That's difficult for a small department that may only have 1 or 2 people on. So through the efforts of the crisis intervention teams, we were able to talk to our partners at the hospital and really brainstorm about ways to minimize that time.
Right.
So there's a wide array of different people that are involved with them, and really make it very, very effective in trying to meet our goals. Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask you one thing, and I'll let Gael speak again. But how do you get this message out? Do you have a website?
Yeah, the state of the Missouri State Crisis Intervention Team Council has a website, which is really a great tool, especially not only for the general public, but also for first responders, because in their website, so you could kind of Google Missouri State Crisis Intervention Team Council, and their site will pop up. But not only are there tools for the public where you can look and locate links to community behavioral health liaisons and so forth, we also have the First Responder Provider Network, which is a network of therapists and practitioners that have specialized in working with first responders that have been vetted and so forth.
Well,
You're listening to The Author's Edge with Gael Freer and Bob Price, coming to you weekly on Saturdays at 10 a.m. on KWRH 92.9 and KXOK 102.9 FM, and then Monday to Friday, 2 and 7 p.m. nationwide on the My Genre Radio Network. And we'll put links to those on our website so that you can easily access those. Also, we'll have a mobile app that you can download too.
oh, we're really getting up there in the world, aren't we?
We're moving on.
Moving on up.
Yep.
All right. So on your team, do you have like specialists in each area? You know, do you have a minister on your team? Because in education, all right, when we have teams like that, we'll have a minister, we'll have a nurse, we'll have, you know, people that we'll have a guidance counselor. So you'd have a team constructed like that. So is that the makeup of do you have like one of each, say, for example?
Not necessarily. So it's not, crisis intervention teams aren't necessarily
It's not prescriptive
it's not like,
format.
the St. Louis Cardinals where they have,
Right.
a catcher, a pitcher. There's, what it is it's more of a collaborative effort.
Okay.
And at any given time, at any monthly meeting, we may have members from probation, parole, members from local law enforcement, members from the hospital, members from the VA. So a lot of these different groups. But not necessarily one every time, but we have the resources to reach out to those at any time.
The other thing I was, all right, so when an officer, for example, is involved in something that is post-traumatic, okay, and that becomes a very traumatic scenario, how do you handle those? How does that fit into that picture?
Sure. Yeah, what we've done is we've really, part of our, so I'm what they call, after I retired as sheriff, so I retired about 2 years ago, and then immediately started working for one of our behavioral health partners. And so I am what they call a community behavioral health liaison. So one of our jobs also is to really center on officer wellness. So our state right now is really doing a lot of very innovative things to try to really address officer wellness, first responder wellness. The Missouri State Highway Patrol has been the foundational unit a lot of times when you're dealing with debriefings and so forth. So if officers are involved in a major traumatic event, you can pick up that phone, call the Highway Patrol, and they would come in and do a debriefing, which is basically we talk about the incidents and so forth. A lot of the behavioral health partners and CIT teams have started to create peer units to be able to try to assist local law enforcement and so forth. If they had an incident, peer counselors can come out and peer workers can come and deal with them. For like in my own personal experience, we had an officer involved shooting in 2018, I believe it was. Actually, today is the anniversary of it. But some of the tools we did, because I was concerned as administrator about my team's wellness, was my officers that had responded to serve an eviction notice. They got basically ambushed at that point. So I immediately sent chaplains to the office for the staff that were there to make sure their wellness was taken care of. And then after that, we did everything from a actual debriefing. And then we took it a step further where we made it mandatory for all of our staff to meet with a counselor at least once. Not that I wanted to know anything about it, but just that they knew that it was okay, so.
Yeah. So we're gonna go to a station break, a short station break, and right now, and we will be right back, folks.
I'm coming back.
Yes, you're coming back.
Oh, okay.
This is Arnold Stricker of St. Louis In Tune on behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page. On behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, this has been Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune.
El Potro Restaurant and Market, located at 6920 Manchester Avenue, 1 block east of McCausland, offers the finest variety of Mexican and Central American groceries and goods. El Potro Restaurant serves authentic Mexican and Central American cuisine, including daily specials, not to mention the best horchata and tastiest margaritas in St. Louis. Open 7 days a week. El Potro, 6920 Manchester Avenue, 1 block east of McCausland.
Okay, we're back, ladies and gentlemen, and we are talking with Richard Stevens, and his book is The Calling. What's the rest of it?
The Calling.
The rest of it. The Calling, seated at the table with the broken.
With the broken.
I like the picture. That's really cool.
That's a great picture.
It is. It's a great picture. It really gets the message. So, tell us more about the book, since that's what Robert keeps telling me. Tell him more about the book.
I just was trying to understand the reason you wrote the book was to get a message out there.
Sure.
And what that is and the stories that are behind this book.
Absolutely. And it's actually kind of an interesting story because the message changed during the process. Originally, I remember I've never been big on writing.
Careful now. You are talking to an English teacher for 39 years.
I remember sitting at home one day. It was right in the aftermath of the Ferguson stuff that was going on. And I remember watching the news and seeing the way that the law enforcement officers were being depicted all around the board. And I remember sitting at home and I got angry, to be perfectly honest. And I remember saying to myself, that is not the men and women that I know. That's just not the way they're putting this out there. Far from perfect, I'll bet it,
Right.
But that's not the men and women that I've known for the last 30 years serving. Someone needs to write a book about this. Well, that somebody ended up being me. And I started with the process of trying to give people a glimpse into what goes through the minds of officers, why they choose to serve their communities as police officers, and kind of some of the stuff they're thinking about. So that was the original goal. And as the process went along, I took a little bit of a hiatus about halfway through. And I'm kind of glad I did, because the book, when I picked it back up and started working again, the book took on a whole new meaning and purpose. And that was to really show the human side. Law enforcement are men and women out there behind the badge. A lot of times, they're expected to act in certain ways and treat everybody with dignity and respect. And no matter what's being said to them or done to them, they're supposed to remain professional. And they should be, But a lot of times we forget about the humanity of these men and women that are actually serving. So the book started taking on a role which I call the behavioral health side, because in my own journey, I remembered that I was just like every other officer out there, and I would deal with different things, maybe, deal with this trauma and deal with that trauma. And when everything was safe and everything was done, I would just throw it in the back burner and move on because that was my job. That's what I was supposed to do.
Right.
And that's okay. But what happens is if we don't effectively deal with those things that we're shoving in the back, if I don't learn good, effective coping strategies for dealing with that, eventually it's going to flow over. And I saw that in my own life because I would very easily just throw stuff in the back, and move on. And I became this master of doing that, like a lot of officers are. Because to reach out for help or to even recognize that there was a need for help would cause me to show vulnerability. And that's the last thing my people needed to see was their leader or their officer that they're calling for help being vulnerable. So we just throw it all in the back. And
Heaven forbid that you're human, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Absolutely.
like my now 10-year-old, but when she was 8, she really said it better than anybody I've ever seen it. And I didn't even realize it. We had went through a situation where one of our beloved pets, was right on the verge of passing away. And we had tried to prolong it as long as possible because we didn't want to say goodbye to our pet. And finally, my wife and I had decided one night that it wasn't fair for the pet. So when she went into one of her episodes, I would just swoop her up, take her in the other room while she passed so that our daughters wouldn't see it. And so she went into an episode, went into the other room, and she came back, so it was like, great. So I brought her back and laid her on her mama's lap, and my 2 daughters were sitting there. And I just went and sat on the couch. And I remember my youngest daughter, she walked up and she said, Dad, she put her hand on my shoulder. She says, Dad, it's okay to cry. And I'm like, oh, well,
Yes.
I'm okay.
Yes.
And she's like, no, Dad, you're not a cop anymore.
Were you out of uniform?
Yeah. She says, Dad, you're not a cop anymore. You can show emotion. And that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks because what cops do is we go into this cop mode. My wife told me about it, and my mom had actually said
And
that
I've
one
seen it
time
with my
too.
dad.
Yeah, where we can't show emotion. We just got to get the job done. I remember when my father passed, I remember listening into the other room as my mom was talking on the phone to one of her friends. And I couldn't hear what the friend had said, but it was something along the lines of, are you okay? Is everything okay? And Mom said, yeah, everything's fine. Rick's taking care of everything. He went into flat out cop mode. And I didn't know what that was, but my wife explained to me, well, that's what you do.
Right. That's what you do.
You put all emotion aside and you just get it done.
You get the job done.
So the book really kind of talked about that. Because I had gotten to the point where I had just shoved it all in the back and just kept getting it done for so many years. Well, I was in tune with my people and I was making sure they had every bit of help they could get. But for me, I didn't need it.
Right.
And then I realized that the last year that I was a sheriff, I didn't want to see anybody. I just wanted to go to work, shut the door. I was angry at the world. All this stuff had just piled over. And because I hadn't effectively dealt with it. So the book really exposes that and talks about the fact that not only this is who are serving us, the men and women, this is why they're doing it, but also those battles that they face that a lot of times we don't see. A lot of times we just take for granted, when we see the men and women in blue or brown or whatever, and
Right.
not think about what they go through.
We see the uniform, we see the badge, but we don't see the person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it's really kind of and a lot of people will say, well, okay, that's a great storyline. In throughout the book, I tell a lot of stories about my own journey, funny stuff, silly stuff, scary stuff, trying to draw the emphasis to help people understand what it is, and then moving towards solutions to getting those officers the help. We talked a little bit before the last break about some of the things that were out there. One of the things the state's done this year to try to make it easier for officers, because officers, for a lot of times, like I said, they don't want to look vulnerable.
Right.
They don't want to look weak.
Right.
Half the time they don't even realize they need help because it's all part of the job until it's too late. But one of the things that we've done, like I had already talked about, was that first responder network. But also they've gotten a new Cortico app that we hope that is in the hand of every police officer in the state of Missouri. And what they can do is it's an app on their phone. They can hit that app. No one's going to know it's them. It's totally
That's what I was going to ask
anonymous.
you. Yes, it's totally
so they don't have
anonymous.
to worry about their bosses knowing that they reached it. And there's just a wide array of officer wellness and health related things. Eventually we want it to where they can literally hit it and be able to talk to somebody, a peer counselor or a therapist. But right now,
that's wonderful.
yeah. So it's really taken away the fear.
Absolutely. Because
people
I
know.
mean, the other thing is as I know from my own experiences with my dad, is that you ask for help and the people up the chain will say, oh, maybe he's not able to do the job. Maybe we need to look at whether or not he's capable. Maybe he's going to have a breakdown. Maybe. And then you find they're not going to get the promotion that they should have gotten, or they're not going to get the recognition they should. And it becomes one of those things where I have to be silent.
Yeah, it's a valid concern. And luckily we're seeing a shift in that.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Because we're getting more education out there to understand that you can't put somebody in a terrible situation day in and day out, and there not being the effect of it. So we're starting to, of course, it's a tough
It's a tough nut to crack.
line as far as police administrators go too, because there's so much liability and so forth. But I think we're really addressing that and really bringing a lot of awareness to the chiefs and the sheriffs, that just like it's better to make sure your men and women are trained.
Yes.
It's also great to make sure they're well.
Absolutely.
And that they're not going to get well if we hide it,
Right.
or make it hard.
Now, Bob, you have some marketing tips you wanted to share with us? I mean, I know we're going from something very serious to some fluff thing that you've put together in the last minute, but, today you did your homework.
Trying to build me up.
Hey, yeah, how'd you know? We do have some marketing tips that Bob would like to share with everyone, because I know that really, going back to the book, we have to figure out ways in which to get the word out there.
Well, the marketing tips that I've got, really, this is in two parts. And so there's 6 things here I'm going to go through that really tell you why, how you want to think about marketing for your book. And it's the wow factor. Is the book great, explosive, stunning, gorgeous? Are you a supermodel, an all-star athlete, a Fortune 500 CEO of books? Can you conjure up a powerful image of your book that makes you very desirable? And that image, that's on the front of Richard's book, The Calling, is a great image.
It is. It's absolutely.
Your book must be a differentiator. Is your book one of a kind, merely better than your competition? Identify what is so special about your book that people should look no further. What exactly does it offer that other books lack? So the third thing is uniqueness. Professional credentials, personal experience matters.
He has those.
Express what makes you, and by extension, your book unique. The fourth item, we're talking about content, style, format matters. Your book must have good content. Your book be written in an appealing style or a voice and presented in an appealing format. the use of fonts, images, glossy paper, unique layouts. Another item is also offer something that's needed or wanted. I mean, becomes a crucial thing. Understand your audience, but people must want or need your book. They don't buy on indifference. Create a want or a need for your book by learning what others want and need. And the last item today, and what I'll do with this tomorrow is put this up on our website. Okay, you can download it. Timing your ask. Timing is everything. The time of the year, week, day, month, or when you solicit another can influence whether you get a positive response or be aware. So be aware of your timing in your publishing.
Timing is everything.
It is.
It really is.
But
all right. So I've got this quote from your book I wanted to share.
Okay.
It's a career where ultimately the officer himself or herself matters little. It's not about how big and bad the cop looks. It isn't about how much money you make, how good you look in uniform, how many any girl or guy you pick up, or how quickly you can exert control over another human being. Being a peace officer isn't about how fast you can drive or the number of bad guys you can arrest. Simply, it's not about you. It's about service.
Yes.
Tell me about that. Tell me what you're thinking when you wrote that.
I'm a firm believer in the nobility of the mission, as I call it.
Mm-hmm.
I think what a lot of people fail to understand is that when men and women get into law enforcement, they all have their own individual reasoning. And maybe it is to drive fast, and maybe it's to look cool and pick up girls or boys, and or just to be in control. But what they learn relatively quickly in their career, if they're going to have a long career, is that it has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with them. And has everything to do with the people that they're serving. Because in the job as a peace officer, if we're centered on those residual things and not necessarily our public, the people we're serving, our careers are going to be not only wrought with tough times and difficulties, it's going to be short-lived because it's a career like no other. It's not a 9-to-5 job.
No.
I remember as a young officer preparing for a date, and I've been wanting to go on this date for a long time. And about 10 minutes before the end of my shift, we got a domestic. So I was 4 hours late. I didn't go on the date, Yep. And that's very common. I remember when I was first considering going into law enforcement, Denver Police Department officer Pat Regan told me, he says, that's great. You're not going to see the sunshine. You're not going to see a holiday. You're not going to see a weekend off for the next 10 years. Trying to explain, so helping people understand that. And especially the young men and women in the field. I remember for many years I taught at the academies, the basic law enforcement academies through this state. And I remember consistently talking to these young men and women that are, with the pipe dreams of, I'm going to be a police officer, and trying to help them understand that it has nothing to do with them, truly. Their whole outlook has to be about the people they're serving.
Yeah, well, my father didn't spend one Christmas with us when we were little.
Yeah.
Every single Christmas we had to wait until Dad came home before we could open our gifts. And generally speaking, it was around 4:00 in the afternoon. So you ask a 7 or 8-year-old little girl, she cannot open that present until he gets home.
Yeah.
That's not an easy thing to do.
It's difficult.
It really is. So I understand it only too well.
Mm-hmm.
So do you, Bob. Say yes, Gael.
were you self-centered as a child?
Moi? High maintenance? Moi? No.
I didn't think so.
Absolutely
I didn't think so. Okay.
Could you explain qualities like appearance and power and control that de-emphasize in the context of being a police officer? Like how does the appearance of, like when a police officer comes on a scene.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just their mere presence. I mean, when you look at the use of force spectrums, just their mere presence, officer presence, is a level because people see that, and that officer that is in control and professional and well groomed and has a nice press uniform. They're going to be looked upon as someone that's going to be able to get the job done and someone that we can trust and look for help when necessary. So, it's extremely important, not only that outward appearance, but also that inward, and being able to control ourselves and ensure that all the stuff that we've been dealing with, that we're effectively coping with and finding strategies to put it aside, so that when we are dealing with our public, so that we're coming across in the appropriate manner.
Can you share some personal experiences with us that you've put in the book that, just amplify that concept of service that you...
Sure. Yeah, I think probably...
Maybe some funny things.
Yeah, one of the first things that really... I tell the story a lot about, because I've been asked numerous times, why did you get into law enforcement? And I don't know. I don't remember. I remember as a young child being drawn to it and deciding I wanted to be an officer. And maybe that was from going to a job fair and seeing this officer there and seeing him in the finely pressed uniform and just a mountain of a man. And it did help that I had a crush on his daughter, but I don't know if it was that or if it was watching the old cop shows like Starsky and Hutch. Some of our listeners probably don't even know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Way before my time.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. But I remember one point where also you were able to see the humanity of an officer. And I remember as a young child growing up in the late 70s, Mom and Dad had pretty much one main rule, and that was when you're out cruising around on your bike, you walk your bike across the street. And I was out in the foothills of Colorado, and I remember riding my bike one day, and there was nobody around. And I remember getting ready. I pulled up to this crosswalk right by the school, and there was an old abandoned gas station off to my right, and there was nobody around. And I remember consciously thinking, well, Mom will never know if I rode my bike across. Now, Mom was one that was constantly, I'm always watching you. Well, I was actually thinking about just riding my bike across and not walking across. And then just out of the blue, this voice came from the heavens. And that voice just simply said,
that was Mom, huh?
This voice said, Rick Stevens, I'm watching you. Now, this just, as a young, I think I was preteen at the time, but a young boy, this was just not right because I was pretty sure that God was talking to me right then and there. What I didn't know was that one of my mom and dad's friends, who happened to be a Colorado State patrolman, was sitting behind that abandoned gas station doing some paperwork. And he knew that from talking with my mom and dad that this is a rule that little Rick was struggling with. And so he went out of his way to help these citizens by keeping their son in check. Now, I didn't find this out for about 30 years.
He spoke over
the intercom system, the PA system on his car.
on his car.
Oh, my God.
So there's no one there except for me and this voice from heaven. And so, that was one of the kind of the fun things that I kind of attribute to why I got into it. Throughout my career, it's been a lot of different situations, whether it was the proverbial cat in the tree call going to probably one of the funniest things that I ever experienced was responding to a low-speed pursuit with a elderly lady that had escaped from the nursing home on a hover-round little scooter. Driving down Main Street. But it really, whether it was those fun stories or the not so fun stories, it really molds those men and women that are working in law enforcement, and really molds their whole outlook. You know, like I said, I've always been one that really centers on the aspect of the calling, the nobility of everything, and not taking things personally because I know I'm going to go home tonight. And I remember arresting a lady out in Colorado, and she was just upset. She had been drinking quite a bit. She saw a picture of my mother that I had in my patrol car, and she had described how my mother was taking part in a specific profession, and for anybody that would upset them. But I knew that it wasn't worth my time because I was taking her to jail, you know. So I just kind of joked back with her, and it totally de-escalated everything. Just that little joke of me saying, well, I told my mom not to be doing that stuff. So it kind of helped reiterate the fact of not only showing my own humanity, but being human to other people, even when they frustrate us.
Yeah. Ultimately, what difference does reading your book make?
Mhm.
Ultimately, what difference does it make to
I think
reading it?
ultimately it helps us catch that glimpse. You know, so when we see the officer driving by, you know, let's face it, we're all human. We're all like, ooh, there's the cops, right?
Oh yeah.
No one likes them behind.
I do that even in spite of
I
everything.
just happen to think that I can't remember waving at the cop.
Yeah,
No.
yeah.
No,
That's
nobody
right.
waves to a
Yeah.
cop.
Yeah.
Well, in a small
Well,
town
even-
in Missouri, you end up waving at everybody, you know.
Right. But even that, you don't wave at the cop. You don't say good morning to the cop. You don't.
No.
I
You
mean,
don't
it
want to draw
just-
any attention, even if you're
No.
doing everything
You don't
right.
want to draw the attention to yourself because you're not like, well, did I do something that I'm not? It's like being called to the principal's office.
I mean, let's face it, I've been an officer for 30 some years, and I don't like them behind me either. But yeah, ultimately that book, it kind of helps people get a glimpse into that, but then it also helps us understand what they go through too.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not all like we see on TV. It's not all the fun and games and stuff. It's tough, but it really kind of goes beyond that, where really I think anybody in a leadership role, whether it's the CEO of a company, whether it's a doctor or a housewife or a house husband, you know, I think they can gain a lot from it because, like I said, 90% of people deal with stress and trauma in their lives.
Yeah, they do.
And just because it's a cop, you know, we may experience it more, but we're all in this together, and we all have to learn how to effectively deal with the stuff that we go through.
It's interesting. I had a sales manager that always had a saying, and he was talking about people, and it was his deal, understanding their come from.
Their come from.
Yep.
Yes,
Understanding their come from.
Yeah, that's great.
that's really good. And then there's one other thing I wanted to ask you. In this book, you described that your officers will feel dead inside.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, in the book, I tell a story about how I was already in the writing process of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd started working in the behavioral health industry. So I really had a lot of people from there that really generally wanted to know what officers were all about to help them.
Mm-hmm.
But they were frustrated because they didn't understand why officers didn't reach out for help. And I remember getting ready to teach an active shooter class at one of the schools with a friend of mine. And we were prepping everything, and there was a group of officers. So I went over there, and I was going to do this, you know, little survey with them, you know, an unofficial survey. And I asked the guys, I'm like, why don't we get help? Why, you know? And I remember one of the officers just kind of looked down, they looked back up, and he says, I've seen so much, I'm just dead inside. And I remember it set me back for a minute, and I'm like, I can relate, you know, because like my last year, I had thrown stuff in the back burner because that's what I was supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, my public needed me to be strong. My men and women needed me to be strong. They needed me to roll up on scene and take care of the problem as safely as possible. So I didn't have time to deal with things. But what happened was it created within me where I was just emotionless.
Mm-hmm.
And
Spent.
I approached
Spent.
everything with a lack of emotion, just throwing it in the back and not dealing with it, to where literally I felt like I was dead inside, because I had
Yeah.
seen everything in my mind and experienced everything, and hadn't found some useful ways to cope with that. The book itself actually turned out to be one of the best coping mechanisms I ever experienced. By sitting down and writing, ended up being very therapeutic for me. And
Are you going to write some more?
yeah,
Do you
we
have
actually
other things in the works?
Yeah, actually, we've got book 2 and 3 completed, and that's at the publisher now. So hopefully it'll be coming out. The second book is a companion to our first book. So the first book, The Calling, Seated at the Table with the Broken. The second book is Honoring the Calling, Escaping the Abyss. And what it is it goes a step further. We all have those special people in our lives that keep us on track. And that was my wife. And my wife said, that was a great book, but you didn't do enough telling people what to do. So book 2, Honoring the Calling, really gets into the traditional and non-traditional modes of coping. Whether it's therapy, whether it's peer counseling, whether it's writing, doing yoga, mindfulness stuff. And then the third book kind of takes a little bit of a different genre. I write a column down in Southeast Missouri. It's called Tales from the Dad's Side, but it's kind of about like my journey as a father, and how we can draw a lot of these from these fun stories that we deal with our kids, and how there's a lot of life lessons in there. So we compiled that, and the book's called Raising Ozark, and it's just a culmination of stories galore about things that we deal with our kids and how we can really gain life lessons from those.
Does this mean we can have you back?
Well, I was just going to say that when book 2 comes out, why don't we have him back so we can talk more? Because this is fascinating. This fascinates me to no end. In case you didn't notice.
It does me too.
Yes. So I think we should have him back. You need to let us know when book 2 comes out, and we can have him back.
Here is my thought on the book is that this isn't just about policemen.
Yeah, absolutely.
This book is for people.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree with that. I think it is. I think it really, honestly,
It's about people.
started with a purpose, but it's about you and I.
It is. And it's about how you and I deal with the things that get us going and get us not going in the world.
Right.
Okay, thank you so much,
Thank
Richard
you.
Stevens, The Calling, Seated at the Table with the Broken. Thank you for tuning in. Amazon, Barnes and Nobles.
Barnes and
Don't
Nobles.
forget. And he's going to come back. Thank you for tuning in to Author's Edge. Tune in again next week for more tips, resources, and your favorite conversations. Our next guest will be Terry Irwin, and we will be chatting about his book, Sergeant Dinwiddie's War. Till then, see you around the inkwell.
So we got one.